Secretly, we all wish for open roads and the chance to drive at unlimited speed. To soar free like the eagles, yet retain the security brought by contact with the earth. Formula One Grand Prix motor racing promises that dream. Grand Prix drivers experience the fastest machinery that modern technology can produce. Beneath the roar of the engines, the glamour, the adrenaline, and the excitement of the crowds are the elements that make it all possible. Tires and the tiremen, the hidden heroes. From the introduction of the Formula One World Championship in 1950, Grand Prix racing had been a thoroughly European occupation. Teams in Britain, France, and Italy, many of whom had been racing since the earliest days of the sport, battled for victory. Drivers flocked to Europe from all points of the compass to pit themselves against the best. By the early 60s, the cars were changing fast. The cutting edge of technology was the Lotus 25. The first successful monocoque racer was effectively a hollow aluminum tube with a rear-mounted engine which was stronger and lighter than its rivals. The brilliant young Scot Jim Clark raced the new Lotus. Amazingly, he won 4 consecutive races on the same set of tires en route to the 1963 championship. On the other side of the Atlantic, busy waging war at Indianapolis with arch-rival Firestone, Goodyear had recognized the potential of the larger European arena. In 1964, head office in Akron, Ohio, which had been racing since 1911, established a Grand Prix outpost at its road tire plant at Wolverhampton, in the motoring heart of England. On the 10th of October, the first purpose-made Goodyear Grand Prix race tire came out of the mold. Now, the company was ready to take the fight, not only to American Firestone, but also to Dunlop, the British firm that was setting the pace of Formula One tire development. On New Year's Day 1965, a new era dawned for Formula One as American Dan Gurney drove his Brabham out onto the East London circuit to practice for the South African Grand Prix on his Goodyear tires. Goodyear took the full plunge into Grand Prix racing, supplying the Brabham and Honda teams. Intriguingly, both teams had Americans on their driving strength. Gurney at Brabham and Richie Ginther and Ronnie Bucknam at Honda. Team owner Jack Brabham had become an enthusiastic Goodyear convert when he won the grueling Tasman Series on tires he'd hand-carried from California to Australia. The first to use Goodyear Grand Prix tires, Brabham was also the first team to score World Championship points on them in the rain-soaked Belgian race, where Brabham finished 4th and Gurney 6th. Soon, both were scoring podium finishes, including 2nd and 3rd at the U.S. Grand Prix at Watkins Glen in early October. However, it was Richie Ginther in his Honda who broke the Formula One barrier for both Honda and Goodyear later that month in the hot and rarefied atmosphere of the Mexican Grand Prix, with Gurney's Brabham making it Goodyear's first 1-2 result. Change was in the air. For 1966, a new formula came into force for Grand Prix racing, larger 3-liter engines. It was a new challenge for Goodyear engineers. Wider tires were needed to support the heavier cars, handle increased power, and provide improved cornering for the faster machines. And to study the new tires in action, the tiremen used novel techniques. Jack Brabham, with the full support of Goodyear, persuaded Repco, one of Australia's biggest engineering concerns, to develop a 3-liter light alloy V8 for his Brabham chassis. Former teammate Dan Gurney was mounting his own AAR Eagle challenge and signed onto the winning Goodyear list. That year, Blackjack Brabham won his 3rd World Championship and a place in the record books as the only man to win the title in a car bearing his own name, beating the less reliable Ferraris and Cooper Maseratis. At the Nürburgring, after winning his fourth consecutive Grand Prix, Brabham paid special tribute to the tires that carried him to his 1966 triumphs. Our early success this year in clear weather convinced us that our tires were unbeatable on dry tracks. Today they prove they also are the best on the wet. Brabham's success was also a success for Goodyear. Just 1 year on from its maiden race win in Mexico, the company had won its first World Championship. Goodyear's Formula One tires were changing fast. 5 inches wide when first introduced in 1965, they quickly grew to 7.5 inches in 1966 and a massive square-shouldered 10 inches in 1967. The combination of these latest Goodyears and the Brabham Repcos was to yield further fruit. Jack Brabham and his New Zealand-born teammate Denny Hulme were head and shoulders above the field. The pair battled year-long for the driver's crown, but it was Hulme who took the 1967 title. In 3 years of Grand Prix racing, Goodyear had won 2 consecutive World Championships. For 1968, new 11.5-inch wide tires with an improved cross-ply construction were introduced along with a new compound to help Goodyear runners battle against Dunlop and Firestone. This behind-the-scenes work by Goodyear's technicians, especially the advances in compounding, helped New Zealander Bruce McLaren in his new M7 Cosworth and teammate Denny Hulme to score 3 Grand Prix victories between them. Elsewhere on the continent, Americans Dan Gurney and A.J. Foyt scored Goodyear's 3rd consecutive success in the Le Mans 24-hour sports car race, and Goodyear wrestled the Indianapolis 500 trophy away from Firestone for the first time in 4 decades. Aerodynamic wings first appeared on Grand Prix cars in 1968. The principle was simple. If an aircraft's wing generated lift, then turning it upside down would create negative lift, that is, a downward force. Pushed down on the track, cars with wings could take corners at higher speeds, but the downforce also increased the car's overall weight at high speeds, causing the tall side walls of the tires to flex. It gave the driver the unnerving feeling that his tires were running flat. Goodyear's engineers were quick to respond with shallower, stiffer sidewalls. At the same time, the tires grew wider to enable drivers and designers to make the most of their newfound high-speed grip. Early wings, however, were hardly well engineered. The tall, spindly supports adopted by many teams were simply not up to the job. Breakages at speed became common, an uncontrollable accident looking for somewhere to happen. As a result, early in 1969, wings were banned. For the fledgling science of Formula One aerodynamics, it was back to the drawing board. Scotsman Jackie Stewart and his Matra Ford dominated 1969, taking 6 victories and the World Championship. But the struggle for supremacy between the rubber companies continued to increase the rate of tire development. The introduction of a new Goodyear compound, G18, specifically tailored for the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring, helped Jackie Ickx's Brabham to ease out Stewart's Matra for a masterful victory. Likewise, the new G20 compound helped Ickx to repeat his success in Canada, and Denny Hulme's McLaren to win in Mexico, a race in which all Goodyear runners demonstrated a marked superiority when compared even to the fastest of their rivals. Goodyear's distinctive, white-leaded, low-profile tires had carved themselves an enviable reputation for speed, safety, and longevity. Goodyear tires did score the first race win of the new decade in South Africa, but thereafter fortunes waned. Firestone was to profit enormously from a car that turned Formula One technical thinking on its head, the Lotus 72. Gone was the classic cigar-shaped body, replaced by a distinctive aerodynamically efficient wedge. Mechanical changes allowed the new Lotus to run further and faster on the brand new generation of lighter Firestones than any of its rivals. Late in the 1970 season, the first Tyrrell appeared, the 001, driven by 1969 champion Jackie Stewart. The new car experienced early mechanical problems, but the potential was there for all to see. Tyrrell clearly had a strong package. At the end of 1970, The pressure of development finally became too much for Dunlop, and the company retired from Grand Prix racing, leaving Goodyear to face up head-to-head with Firestone. Tyrrell strengthened his package over the winter by signing up with Goodyear. Together, Goodyear, Tyrrell, and Stewart began to define the way in which all Grand Prix teams would go tire testing. Right from the beginning of 1971, Jackie committed himself to intensive test sessions at tracks across the globe, and it was this high-pressure test program that allowed Goodyear to become the first tire manufacturer to overcome the enormous vibration problems that afflicted all F1 cars at the time.
And it would just gradually go together. It was very controllable. Whereas with the other ones, if, for instance, you went in a little bit wrong and had too much understeer, as soon as you lifted off from understeer,
back in,
immediately went into oversteer, yeah. And of course by this, the car changed direction slightly. Not only
this testing also allowed Goodyear to work further to prevent another major problem: chunking. Tires throwing off their tread under the stress of high downforce cornering. Soon, trimming the edge off the tire tread would be a thing of the past. The Stewart-Tyrrell-Goodyear combination was the one to beat in 1971, and as the cars developed, so too did the tires. At the French Grand Prix at the new Paul Ricard circuit, Goodyear unveiled its latest weapon, the slick tire. Previously, all race tires had tread patterns on their surface, a throwback to their early road tire roots. But the new smooth surface of the slick tire had several advantages. At a stroke, a major problem disappeared as there was no tread to be thrown off. Presenting a smooth rubber surface to the road not only cured the unsettled feeling previously experienced by drivers under the forces of cornering, but allowed even heat distribution across the tire's surface. From now on, grooved tires would be used only for wet conditions, where the channels between the tread blocks were needed to disperse water, as on a road car. There was, however, great initial resistance to slicks. Many drivers equated smooth tires with lack of grip. No tread equaled worn out and of no use. But Stewart and drivers like Dan Gurney, Denny Hulme, and Bruce McLaren, who had raced on slicks at Indianapolis, accepted them immediately, and soon others grudgingly followed. Though for several seasons to come, Goodyear would continue to keep a small supply of treaded tires for the diehards who could not bring themselves to trust the new smooth covers. The punishing test program had yielded dividends for Goodyear and Tyrrell. With wins in Spain, Monaco, France, Britain, and Germany, Stewart sealed a second title for himself, and Tyrrell tied up the manufacturer's crown, aided by Francois Sever's win at Watkins Glen. It was Goodyear's third drivers and manufacturers double. Lotus had struggled in Tyrrell's wake during 1971, but the team's fortunes turned around in '72. Though champions Stewart and Tyrrell won the first race of 1972 in Argentina, the dominant combination of the previous season was unable to repeat its form.
Yeah, I think so. I've got a back-end problem when I get out of the corner, but the biggest problem is pointing the car. I can't point the car in all these corners going down the hill.
Taking a lead from Tyrrell and Goodyear, Lotus and Firestone had considerably upped their game. Young Brazilian Emerson Fittipaldi opened his scoring with a win in Spain. Stewart managed to take the checkered flag at Clermont-Ferrand on his new, wider Goodyears, which had grown from 13 to 14 inches wide, but was shut out of the winner's circle until the end of the year, when he ended the season with back-to-back victories in Canada and the USA. But Fittipaldi's relentless point scoring built him an unassailable lead. And by the Italian race at Monza, it was clear the 25-year-old would become the sport's youngest ever world champion. Over the winter of '72-'73, Goodyear's unceasing development scored a major coup, encouraging Team Lotus to switch from Firestone. Fittipaldi opened his title defense with wins in Argentina and at home in Brazil, before Jackie Stewart's Tyrrell took victory in South Africa. Lotus newcomer Ronnie Peterson, finding his first win elusive, finally broke through the front runners in France. Thereafter, the season became a three-way fight between the Swede, the Scot, and the Brazilian.
Not bad. Better today.
Ably supported by Francois Siver, Stewart made the most of what he had decided would be his last season, winning his final Grand Prix at the fearsome Nürburgring. By Canada, Jackie has sealed his third driver's title, while Lotus tied up the manufacturer's crown. It was a double success for Goodyear, whose tires had won all 15 races of the year. Denny Hulme and Peter Revson picking up 3 wins for McLaren that Tyrrell and Lotus had missed out on. For 1974, McLaren teamed Hulme with Emerson Fittipaldi. The season started well, Hulme taking victory in Argentina, Fittipaldi in Brazil. Both times, the red and whites had beaten Ferrari into second place, but the scarlet cars struck back in Spain.
15 seconds. After 15 seconds.
This was the first race at which Goodyear had supplied full wet weather tires, which could only survive in the wet, as opposed to the more resilient tire which could handle wet and drying tracks. When the rain abated, the field changed onto slicks. Lauda winning for Ferrari, teammate Clay Regazzoni second. So began a period of intense rivalry between Ferrari and McLaren. Fittipaldi beat Lauda at the next race in Belgium before the teams headed for Monaco. On that most glamorous of circuits, Lotus and Ronnie Peterson marked Goodyear's coming of age as the long-term Formula One winning force, scoring the company's milestone 50th Grand Prix victory. McLaren had been addressing itself to the perennial problems inherent in starting a Grand Prix. The car's tires were never up to optimum operating temperature and consequently couldn't yield all their grip at the start.
Emerson made a good start.
No,
Oh.
not a good start, but then
It's possible then cover, when they're still quite warm.
In an effort to give Hulme and Fittipaldi a better chance of the bitterly cold Canadian Grand Prix, as the cars returned to the grid after their warm-up laps, mechanics threw blankets over the tires in an effort to retain some of the heat, which the drivers had carefully worked into them by putting the rubber under load, weaving around the circuit on the way to the start. This was only partially successful, and it would be another 10 years before electrically heated blankets would be successfully used to bring tires up to optimum temperature. Fittipaldi's consistent point-scoring ability finally brought him his second world championship, McLaren edging Ferrari into second of the manufacturer's table, as Goodyear recorded another title double, again winning every one of the season's 15 Grand Prix. At the end of 1974, Firestone pulled out of Formula One. Goodyear was now the sole supplier and faced a twofold dilemma. Firstly, how to supply 30 cars, where before they had needed to manufacture tires for about half a dozen. Secondly, how to continue the long-term technical development program without the spur of direct competition.
coming down there and I just turned left.
The key was Goodyear's determination to do the job as well as it could possibly be done. Goodyear had a thirst for continued technological advance and knowledge rarely found in a giant company not facing competition. Irrespective of whether there was anybody else in the game, Goodyear continued to put the same total commitment into developing tires for the whole grid that had previously been focused on just a handful. No one would be forced to use second best. Now that every car had the same tires, the chassis designer's input was more clearly evident, and a winter of intense development work at Ferrari was to reap rewards. A new development of the Italian company's successful 312 continued to give drivers Niki Lauda and Clay Regazzoni an edge, and it was only when the red cars faltered that anyone else would have a chance of victory. Ferrari's season took off in Monaco, Lauda dominating practice and winning from Fittipaldi. Ferrari's first win in the Principality in 20 years. At the Dutch Grand Prix, a new constructor, Hesketh, entered the record books. The team, privately owned by Britain's Lord Hesketh, scored their first and only Grand Prix victory. It was a great performance that marked driver James Hunt as more than an impetuous newcomer with a string of crashed cars behind him. Momentarily, Lauda and Ferrari seemed shaken. Nicky took pole in France, but Hunt came close to repeating his Dutch win, Lauda finally beating him off. Lauda could only convert pole into third in Germany and fared even worse at home in Austria, slipping to sixth by the end of the shortened race. But honor was restored for the cars with the prancing horse at Monza, with Lauda and Ragazzoni first and second in practice. The Swiss led all the way to win, but third for Lauda and a dominant win in the final race took the Austrian to the World Championship. Goodyear's continued commitment to tire development moved on apace with the launch of the company's most ambitious research project to date, the Vehicle Dynamics program. Using equipment specifically designed and built for the task, Goodyear's technicians were able to collect information on the behavior of a racing car under all conditions at a variety of locations. Combined with the input of the drivers, this led to a far better understanding of exactly what happened to a racing car at speed. Using this system, chassis and tire engineers were able to work hand in hand to match developments in their respective fields for maximum performance. Chassis designers were kept busy adapting their cars to make full use of the constant stream of new tires, compounds, and data emerging from this program. A classic example of this cooperation came with the launch of Tyrrell's Radical P34 in 1976. The new car's unique six-wheel layout hoped to solve several perennial problems. The 10-inch front wheels, shod with the smallest Formula One racing tires Goodyear had ever produced, helped create an aerodynamically low frontal area that gave greater front-end adhesion by enlarging the rubber contact area and increased the braking surface to give increased stopping power. The six-wheeler debuted at the Spanish Grand Prix, taking second and third in Monaco.
That's the theoretical reason. It's going to be fast down the straight because it's narrow, and it's going to be fast around the corner because it's got more rubber.
The Tyrrell duo then blitzed the Swedish race. South African Jody Scheckter winning from pole. His French teammate Patrick Depailler finished second. Though the car and drivers clearly showed they had speed, the P34 simply wouldn't be able to consistently match the season's pace setters. James Hunt, now at McLaren, and reigning champions Nicky Lauda at Ferrari. The two were locked in combat all season, although Lauda retired from the French Grand Prix, allowing Hunt to take maximum points. It seemed that he could not fail to maintain the championship.
The whole car just blocked, and I was sliding along, and then, just blew up here.
But in the German Grand Prix, the Austrian's car careened out of control. Amazingly, despite the near-fatal accident, he would return to the cockpit in just 6 weeks. However, even when Lauda was out of action, Hunt seemed to have problems scoring points. John Watson took Penske's only Formula One win at the next race, Austria, while Hunt was only fourth. Hunt did manage to repeat his Dutch win of the previous year, but only after a wheel-to-wheel battle with Watson's Penske. Going into the final race in Japan, Lauda held a slender 3-point lead. Conditions were appalling. The race started in a torrential downpour, and Lauda returned to the pits after 2 laps, deciding that the track was simply too dangerous. Hunt was on target and took the championship from Lauda by just a single point. In 1977, Hunt and Lauda were widely expected to set the pace. But the first race of the season saw a debut victory for Formula One newcomers Wolf Racing. South African Jody Scheckter seized a convincing victory after Hunt had led the first half of the race from pole. Argentinian Carlos Reutemann won for Ferrari in Brazil. Teammate Nicky Lauda was victorious in South Africa. As power outputs had soared through the 70s, so tires grew and grew. Midway through the decade, engines were producing around 700 horsepower, and the rubberware was constantly changing to suit. Aerodynamics were becoming more sophisticated, working the tires even harder. After 2 seasons of tire supply monopoly, Goodyear faced a rival in the shape of the French company, Michelin, recruited to the Formula One arena by French car giant Renault. Renault, winner of the first ever Grand Prix in 1906, brought its road car experience of turbocharged engines into play, developing a 1.5-liter turbo V6 to race in its own chassis. The Gallic newcomer was greeted with skepticism bordering on derision when it arrived at Silverstone. But his driver, Jean-Pierre Jabouille, comfortably made the grid, Renault becoming the first manufacturer to race a turbo. However, the greatly increased operating temperatures of the turbocharged engine brought to a premature end the first faltering step of a technology that would take over Formula One. The arrival of Renault heralded the start of a new technology war for Goodyear, for the new car used tires which, unlike Goodyear's product, were of radial rather than cross-ply construction. Hunt's title defense was not going well. He didn't win a race until Britain, by which time he was too far behind Lauda to stage a recovery. Midsummer, Lauda chalked up another milestone victory for Goodyear. The Austrian scored Goodyear's 100th Grand Prix victory in Germany. On hand for the celebrations and to witness the fruits of his efforts was Richie Ginther, who clinched Goodyear's first Formula One win some 12 years earlier. Although he had won only one more race, by Watkins Glen, Lauda had sealed his second world championship. For 1978, Ferrari negotiated a change to Michelin, figuring that they would get preferential treatment from a manufacturer with just 2 teams to supply. It was a canny move. Ferrari recognized the generally accepted truth that no matter how good a car, its tires were still a critical factor in the performance equation.
The tires, of course, play a most vital part. You can see by the difference in lap times between using a soft compound and a hard compound can be as much as 2 seconds a lap. A most vital part of the car. It is, of course, the part of the car which connects the car to the track. For that reason alone, it's vital.
Colin Chapman, the founder of Lotus, had once again revolutionized Formula One technology with his Lotus 79. Ground effect car, wing car. Whichever nickname you choose, the result was the same. It sent the rest of the racing world scrambling back to their drawing boards.
What we're really trying to do is to promote airflow under the car in order to be able to contour the underside of the car so it produces a negative lift. In other words, the air passing under the car helps to hold it on the road. Holds the car down, it improves the grip of the tyres on the road, improves the stability of the car, and improves the safety of the car.
Mario Andretti led from start to finish at the Belgian Grand Prix, never troubled on his way from pole position to checkered flag. Goodyear, too, was refining its radial experiments, convinced that continuing chassis changes might make radials even more effective and necessary. Meanwhile, Brabham's young designer Gordon Murray, figuring that if some low pressure was good, then more would be better, positioned a large fan at the rear of the car to suck the air out, adding to the partial vacuum effect. The fan car, as it was immediately dubbed, made its debut at the Swedish Grand Prix with John Watson qualifying second fastest. Lauda took the lead in the other Brabham fan car when poleman Andretti retired, racing to victory half a minute clear of the field. The protests flooded in. The drivers complained because the fan blew all sorts of grit and other rubbish back at them, and the other team managers questioned the car's legality on any grounds they could think of. Lauda's victory was allowed to stand, but the fan car was banned. At the British Grand Prix, without fanfare or announcement, Goodyear experimented with a tire that would eventually take over Grand Prix racing, its own radial. Patrick Tambay finished in the points, but the reign of the Goodyear crossply was far from over. Andretti took victory for Lotus in Germany, teammate Ronnie Peterson in Austria. Then the American led the Swede home for another 1-2 in Holland. In just 3 months, they had racked up 8 wins, enough to finish first and second overall in the Drivers' World Championship, clinch the manufacturer's crown, and hand Goodyear another title double, beating Reutemann and Ferrari on Michelin's. The Lotus spawned several imitators, notably Ferrari, which started 1979 with the strongest machinery and undoubted driving talent in Jody Scheckter and his French-Canadian teammate Gilles Villeneuve. Between them, they proudly carried the fortunes of Maranello, doing great justice to the legend of the Scarlet Cars. The season climaxed in an explosion of Italian euphoria as Scheckter led his teammate home at Monza to a rapturous reception as the new world champion. At the end of '79, Goodyear's Formula One tire manufacturing was moved to the company's newly created racing department in Akron. By far the world's biggest race tire facility, it was packed with ultra-high-tech machinery needed to produce tens of thousands of tires each year with the incredible consistency required by top-flight motorsport. Moving into a new decade and a new era of competition, Goodyear was arming itself with the weapons necessary to defend its position at the top of the Grand Prix tire business. That position was reasserted during the 1980 season. The Williams team and its Australian driver Alan Jones combined to take the Drivers' and Manufacturers' Championships in a season where Goodyear won all but 3 races. Jones and Williams looked to defend their titles in 1981, but such was the equality between the top drivers and cars that even a small advantage would be enough to tip the balance of power. For Brabham, that advantage came mid-season when the team swapped from Michelin to Goodyear. Nelson Piquet seized the championship by 1 point at the final race, tying up another Goodyear double. Aerodynamics had never played such an important role in the performance of a race car. Goodyear's technicians worked hand in hand with the designers, learning about every advance as it happened, in order to be able to produce tires that could cope with the enormous forces involved. The cars were generating such downforce that, at speed, they effectively were almost 10 times their original weight. In addition, almost all the springing effect to cushion the car from the road was being provided by the tires alone. Goodyear's rubber was certainly earning its keep, taking Williams driver Keke Rosberg to the 1982 title and Ferrari's René Arnoux to another milestone in 1983. His Canadian Grand Prix victory was Goodyear's 150th Formula One race win. Midway through 1984, Michele Alboretto's victory for Ferrari in Belgium ushered in a new era. It was the first win for Goodyear's new radial tire, and from then on, the Formula One crossply was consigned to history. Chief among Goodyear's design tools was the predictive testing race circuit simulation system. Vast amounts of data were fed into this system to give an accurate model of both circuit and vehicle. The mass weight distribution and suspension geometry of various cars were measured over countless laps of real circuits to allow the computer to accurately predict a car's theoretical behavior under any circumstances. Goodyear's technicians could utilize the computer's simulation program to help them choose exactly the right compounds for each circuit, vital in the ongoing tire wars.
We're competing right now against Pirelli. We know they're trying to catch up or beat us on tire technology, and of course, there's always a way of improving. We come down here, we test constructions, we test materials inside the tire, we test different mold shapes, and we're just trying to make a better race tire, a faster race tire.
A worldwide schedule of continuous testing was still a major part of the equation. The computer predictions gave the engineers a wealth of information to help shorten the design time of new tires and compounds. But the feedback of the drivers and teams when these new developments were tried was crucial. Goodyear knew that no effort could be spared in their desire to keep ahead of the opposition. The story of Grand Prix racing from the mid-'80s really centered around the McLaren team. Team boss Ron Dennis had a simple policy: combine the best cars with the best engines and the best drivers. After that, winning should be simple. And so McLaren made it seem, as weekend after weekend, millions of TV screens across the globe showed the familiar sight, the checkered flag greeting the red and white cars. McLaren won the 1984 title, taking all but 4 races, Lauda the champion, half a point ahead of teammate Alan Prost. In 1985, McLaren's success continued. Prost won 5 races and became the first Frenchman in history to take the Drivers' Championship. Lauda helping to beat off the Williams challenge to ensure another McLaren title double. Again in 1986, in the face of stiff Williams opposition, Prost and McLaren went on to successfully defend their titles. It was also the last year in which a tire company other than Goodyear won a Grand Prix. But in 1987, a Williams won the title for the third time in the decade. Nelson Piquet and British teammate Nigel Mansell were crushingly dominant all year, leaving even McLaren trailing in their wakes. The Brazilian finally sealed his third World Drivers' Championship, Williams the runaway winners of the Constructors' title. Austrian Gerhard Berger and Ferrari scored another milestone victory for Goodyear in Australia, the company's 200th Grand Prix win. McLaren's winning ways continued in 1988. Prost and Brazilian teammate Ayrton Senna amazingly winning 15 of the season's 16 races. Senna the champion. It was an unprecedented achievement. The two giants of the era continued their battle. Prost claiming the title in 1989, Senna winning it back in the 1990 season. Senna's McLaren helped Goodyear to yet another milestone in 1991. His win in Brazil was the 250th time a Goodyear-shod car had taken a Grand Prix victory. Senna went on to win his second championship in succession. In 1992, Williams followed the McLaren formula with the best chassis, the best engines, and in Nigel Mansell, the man who could exploit them to the best advantage. Mansell seized the driver's title, Williams the manufacturers.
You know, there's not many people that can boast that they've won all their races on Goodyear tires, and I'm very proud to say that I have.
Supplying the entire Formula One field is a mammoth undertaking. To each of the 16 races across 5 continents, Goodyear transports more than 2,000 tires, supported by an army of engineers and technical staff. Over the last 30 years, teams and drivers have come to rely on the commitment of the men from Goodyear to provide not only the best, but the safest tires. That commitment was tested to the full when the governing body insisted on narrower tires for 1993. Slashing the width from 18 to 15 inches, the tires now offered up almost 1/5 less rubber area to the road. The decision had been relayed to Goodyear in July 1992, but amazingly, by September, the company's engineers had new tires ready for the teams to test. Making the tires narrower inevitably reduced tread life and increased operating temperatures. This was overcome by a new rubber compound which boasted better heat transfer properties, offering longer racing life and better grip. Many observers had forecast that the change to the regulations would mean slower lap times, but that was seldom the case, a tribute to the skill of the company's engineers. Not content with meeting this challenge, Goodyear also introduced a brand new wet weather tire, the Quattro, offering even better water clearance properties than its predecessor for superior wet weather grip.
In our case, if a guy's got an idea that the engineers think's a good idea, we can create that tire and have that tire on a racetrack in 2 weeks.
With the new tires, Williams and Goodyear continued into 1993, where they'd left off in '92, Prost taking his 4th World Championship. By the end of 1993, Goodyear had won 296 Grand Prix, 21 Drivers' Championships, and 22 Constructors' titles, making the company far and away the most successful tire supplier in Formula One. Goodyear's designers and technicians are committed to ensuring every single tire is as competitive and as safe as it can possibly be. And in 1994, the success story continues. Damon Hill and Williams chalked up Goodyear's 300th Formula One victory at the Spanish Grand Prix, an achievement saluted by FIA Vice President Bernard Eccleston. Goodyear's dedicated band of technicians, normally the unsung heroes behind the scenes, enjoyed a moment in the limelight, confident in the knowledge that although they seldom attract the attention of the outside world, the drivers who depend on them and their tires value their presence in Formula One as highly as anyone's. To the men who place their lives in Goodyear's hands, these hidden heroes will continue to be the cornerstone of Formula One.